Shanmugam. I'm a second year trainee at UCL. I think I was drawn to it. I was always very interested in kind of people and understanding why people are the way they are, maybe, or the idea of psychology interested me. I thought that I guess I could see it in myself, like the way I was with different people in different groups and in different settings, and I guess I was quite interested in why people acted the way they did, what made them feel the way they did, and that got me thinking about kind of psychology. And I suppose even just watching TV shows, I'd be sort of trying to analyse it or trying to think about things in terms of why they are the way they are, or why they're behaving in that particular way. So I was quite curious, I think. I didn't get to do psychology at school, so perhaps that made me more interested in it, that there wasn't a subject that there that I could study in that way. But I decided I would want to study it at university, so I applied to do psychology at undergraduate, and I guess that's where I really started to learn lots of different theories and these different ideas that psychology or psychologists have identified or have kind of come up with, and those theories were really interesting, and in particular I quite liked how clinical psychology, which I'd heard a little bit about, seemed to me a way of applying some of those theories in a way that could help people, in a way that could try to understand kind of not just individual sort of difficulties, but like group difficulties with different groups of people, and finding ways to try and understand how best to support those difficulties as well, try to overcome those difficulties. So I think it was there that I started to think I quite like this, and that's when I started to read up a bit more about it. I don't think I was ever really sure what I wanted to do until that point. Now I've had like a few ideas. I remember thinking teaching or social work or doing something, working with people. That was always something I was interested in doing. For me, clinical psychology was, when I read about it, seems to be a way of really learning quite a lot. I suppose it was just a lot more training, a lot more of a journey, it seemed, to kind of become a clinical psychologist, and that interested me a lot. I thought that sounded like a really good opportunity, and they see clinical psychologists, from what I understood, seem to be able to use those theories of psychology in a really helpful way to make a big difference, and I kind of believe that. I believe those things made a lot of sense to me. So I think that's where I decided that I wanted to work towards that. I wanted to get onto that kind of pathway where I'm seeking opportunities to work towards being a clinical psychologist. One thing I wanted to add was that actually knowing the answer to that question is really difficult. I think that I maybe I'm still trying to work out myself why I was interested in clinical psychology, what made me want to be a clinical psychologist. So I think, I suppose it's a case of trying to understand what it is that led me to want to sort of help people, what it is that made me so interested in being with people or interacting with people, or kind of trying to make a difference in that particular way. I think it can often seem a bit of a cliche to say I want to help people, I want to be someone that can make a difference in that way, but I think what's more interesting to me is why I want to do that. And I think there is a bit of learning that the course, the training that I'm doing, and the kind of experience of like trying to understand myself, as well as being able to try to help others and make sense of others' kind of difficulties with them. I think that process is something that maybe I'll continue to go on and have a clearer idea of why I'm interested in these things, what shaped my interests and my kind of hopes that led me to kind of where I'm at right now as a trainee clinical psychologist. Just thought to add that. Tough tips. For me, I think one of the top tips I had from a friend, a sort of family friend who was a mental health social worker. He was the one person I knew that kind of like in that way that felt like I could get some advice from him. I remember it was in an email or message, and he'd sort of encouraged me with like that phrase, the squeaky hinge is the one that gets the oil, and it is just a sort of a phrase or kind of maybe a cliche, I don't know, but it's one of those things that at that time I remember sort of thinking that's exactly what I needed to hear, and that's exactly the advice I needed. That I would be I'd always be very cautious and sort of reluctant maybe to kind of approach people for like advice, or to hassle people that maybe I could get some further advice from, or I could get some work experience from, or I could just have a chat with. And even in seeking jobs, like they might have been kind of quite sort of random, very different sort of roles that I was applying for, but not being afraid to kind of just try and hassle people for kind of whatever it is that might be helpful. So I think that was a really important thing for me to learn, that it's okay to kind of not be really, really annoying, but sort of be able to chase things up and kind of keep on going, that kind of asking questions and seeking opportunities. In terms of opportunities for work experience, I think it is really tricky, that first sort of experience, that first bit of experience, and it's really often, in my mind, it was a kind of a narrow set of roles that seemed like the ones that I needed, and actually there's quite often a load of different roles, so many that you can you can learn so much from. And I guess it's about throwing that net out a bit further, I suppose. And I think with getting whatever role it is, whatever sort of foot in the doorway you can, that once you're there, once you're in a role of some sort, in a service of some sort, then I guess there are opportunities that still can come your way whilst you're in that role. Maybe looking at offering to do an audit, for example, or doing any research opportunities, seeing if there are any other professionals, any other kind of roles in the team that you can shadow, or you can kind of get involved with in any groups. So I think it was similar to the squeaky hinge thing, just kind of really sort of putting myself out there. And I think that's a tip that is really important, particularly if you're someone that you think you're not necessarily likely to boldly request things and to do that more naturally. But yeah, there are so many different roles that I think for myself and from others that I've spoken to on the course and other trainees, that they can be so helpful, that you don't quite realise how much you can learn from a particular support worker role, or carer role, or whatever it might be, and being able to reflect on those, being able to think about what you've learned from those roles and those opportunities, I think is they're really invaluable, really. And I think another thing that I found was really helpful is, as part of degrees or any research that you're doing, kind of, I found it was helpful to have had a bit of clinical kind of research, so doing research, working with people that were part of an NHS service or social services or something like that. And I guess it's quite a natural way, I felt, to get a bit of that kind of contact with people, I suppose, that isn't purely a research angle, but is actually about meeting with people, hearing from their experiences, and it's a nice way of kind of building up a bit of confidence in speaking with different people that are using services, I guess. And of course, it's important because as a clinical psychologist, we're researchers as well. We're kind of wanting to understand research and to be able to carry it out and undertake it, as well as being able to read it and understand it. So I think if there are any opportunities to take on any sort of research, I do think it seems like a really sort of important part of the training and what they're looking for when they're sort of selecting trainees. And for me, having a bit of the research that was clinical, working with clinical populations, I guess, that was quite nice to be able to do the two things, I suppose. Yeah, I guess you've got to be in it to win it, essentially. And although I suppose there is that thing of you usually know if you're ready to apply, if you've had the kind of experiences, if you feel sort of at a good place and ready to kind of undertake the training, then I think at that point it's a case of just doing it, and so really taking that time to go through it, not sort of just saying I'm not going to bother because I don't think I'll get it. I think for me it was a case of saying, actually, I'm just going to try this, and whatever happens, it's a process, there's a learning of kind of applying, and if I don't hear anything, or if I do hear something, then I'm always going to be trying to learn about what I can try to do to reapply again if I don't get on to the course. So I think that would be a really big do, is kind of go for it as soon as you feel ready, because the second time, the third time, whatever number of times you've done it, each time I think it's you're adding to it, you're building on it, you're tweaking it, refining it, and that's quite nice to map as well, to see kind of the journey in that sense. But I think it makes it easier each time, I guess, is that point. I think also there's like a long period of when you get given the application and when the deadline is, and I would say try to, I mean, I wasn't always very good at this, but I think that trying to, especially at the beginning, when I was first applying, I think it can be quite daunting, and you're sort of looking at this thinking, how am I going to get started with this? But actually just slowly starting to look at it, to think about it, and to get things down on paper, I think gives you that time to then keep looking at it, keep revising it. And for me, that was what I did. I slowly kind of started building it up. I think the other do is trying to, I think there's often a pressure, similar sort of pressure, to fit the mould maybe, and to sort of tick some boxes. And probably I believed at the time there were some realities to like ticking boxes, I guess, to be eligible. But I guess swinging from too far that way and losing kind of who I am in the application. And my advice the advice that I was given was to try and convey who I am in the application, and not lose myself in that, if that makes sense. Wherever there are opportunities, trying to share what makes you, what you're interested in, what do you do to kind of manage, even kind of selecting, being selective with what you sort of demonstrate on the form. I think is in some way, depending on how you write it, can say a bit about who you are. But I suppose it's that for that reason, it's got to be quite reflective in the language that you use, rather than descriptive, just sort of naming exactly what you've done, and sort of trying to kind of throw in too many maybe buzzwords or things that you think most people are trying to also communicate, versus trying to sort of be reflective of the experiences that you've had, what you learned from it, what maybe even any limitations to the things that you've done. So for me, there was kind of a few experiences that I thought seemed quite good experiences. I really felt like I learned a lot from them, but trying to think, like actively thinking, what have I not been able to demonstrate in this, or what was not what was missing in that, perhaps, and people working in psychology that could check it. But at the very least, I think I was able to send it to I think it was my dad, but just kind of like to someone that can read it over and see that it makes sense, that it's flowing, it's kind of readable, and that it's just that thing about not being too generic, that it sounds like me, as a tip to do sort of highlight the achievements and the things that you've accomplished or things that you've done, not necessarily kind of qualification wise or kind of anything like that, but just what you've learned and how you managed, because the roles and the experiences that we often have to have pre-training, like kind of as we're looking to apply, they're tough roles, and actually there's a lot there that we can emphasize, so definitely do that. Don't compare yourself too much to others. I think I guess you might have another application, someone else's application, or someone else that you know that's got on, or someone else that you know that's applying, and I guess there can be a danger, I think, in comparing ourselves too much to others. You might sort of dismiss experiences because others haven't sort of had them and won't be talking about them or kind of using that in the application. But actually, I think I've already mentioned it, but that idea of it's not about quite what you've done, it's like how you've learned about what you've done, or how you've reflected on what you've done. Don't list everything. Don't try and squeeze too much in. Perhaps I think that's fair. I think for me there were different experiences I've had. Some that were seemingly less relevant, I suppose, and some that seemed a little bit more like kind of traditional experiences or roles. And I suppose one thing I could have done was just to put them all in, try to find a way of highlighting every little different thing. And I think there's a place in the application to kind of just state what you did very, very briefly. But in terms of kind of those other bits of the application, I found like often I was naming a lot of things, and I was not going into too much detail. And I think the detail and the kind of the depth of kind of content of what I've learned, what I've been able to do in one or two or three kind of roles seemed to me more natural way of writing up that section versus the kind of long list of trying to shoehorn in every odd experience I've had. I think for me, the interview is a thing where it's in my mind it was more of a performance, I guess. So that's how it felt, and I know what I mean by that is there's that anxiety, a particular anxiety that I would experience of kind of having to go there, and having to be able to think as clearly as possible with all the kind of the other things that might distract me, or the things that are in my mind, or the worries or feelings. So I guess there was, for me, ado was finding a way to manage my feelings, those anxieties, those nerves. And I think it's natural, and there's no way you would maybe even want to have that experience without any nerves. So it's not to say that nerves are really bad, but I guess I knew that in that moment that would be the thing that would stop me from being able to be as natural and be as thoughtful as I could. And given that that's what I kind of understood they were looking for, I tried to find a way of managing that. So there was, I think, just relaxation exercises, or there's lots of different things people can do just to unwind and kind of take it easy. I think for me, not reading over anything the night before, that was just my way. I just wanted to sort of find my own sort of place where I can be calm and be content. I had actually a colleague, an old colleague, a supervisor, who had helped me a little bit beforehand. So they had given me this exercise of kind of like, I think it was like a visualization exercise. So I had to sort of visualize what I was going to be like in the morning, getting up of the day on the interview. And I think the idea was to sort of imagine if you were the best version of yourself, or if you were sort of in a good place and you were happy or content or relaxed, how might others see you? How might others be able to know that you were that way? So I had to imagine sort of waking up and thinking, how might others see me if I was in a good place, if I was relaxed? And that continued as I imagined walking out of the house and a neighbour seeing me. I had to sort of kind of visualise being content and being relaxed. But what I found from that exercise or that experience was that on the day, I just kind of, I think that that helped, that I sort of had kind of gone through these steps, I suppose, in my mind. So I know that's probably not what everyone will find helpful, but I think it helped me. And I think the reason, or the main key there is to find whatever it is that you know helps you to relax. Perhaps it's watching kind of a nice comedy show, or like a good favourite movie, doing something that just helps you to unwind. I think the other do for the interview is similar to the application maybe, but just trying to be myself as much as possible, trying to take a bit of time actually to answer questions in the interview. It's quite difficult at times to sort of in the moment try and respond, and often I think I have found that I'm not answering the question when I'm sort of quickly responding. So just taking a bit of time, I think, to think about the question, and actually with that as well, having answered maybe, or having responded to the question, if you haven't already, maybe then also thinking, what was the question and have I kind of answered it? And you might have, but I know that for me, there are times where I know I probably haven't answered it exactly, or it hasn't been as clear. And so asking myself that question, how have I answered the question, prompts me to sort of try and summarize it, or to try and relay what I've said, like connect what I've said to the question to make it clear. Maybe a don't is to not just read. For me, that was the thing that I struggled with. I think I would read and read and read, and I was enjoying that. That was one of the things that helped me to do that. I was reading stuff that I found interesting. I kind of tried to make sure I enjoyed it. But then I remember sort of like that same colleague that I think I mentioned that had helped me to prepare. They were asking me a couple of questions, and I remember sort of like a mock interview, I guess, just kind of to test it out. And it was at that point at which I realised that actually, although I'd read stuff that made a lot of sense and was really interesting, how to articulate kind of a response to a question that related to it was totally different. And so it was then actually, maybe I left, I didn't have as long, but I think actually what I did after that was just continually, every time I read something, I'd say, how can I answer the question? Or I'd have a set of questions here, and I'd take one, and I think, given what I've just read, how can I answer the question? And I'd practice actually speaking that out. For me, recording it was really helpful. I recognised there were lots of things. I mean, it's a horrible experience. It's really, for me, it was very awkward to watch back and to listen back. But just having that kind of audio recording of how I'm responding was really helpful, because I'd noticed I'm using particular words, too frequently, or I'm uttering things. I've got certain utterances, or you sort of try. You don't want to become overly self-conscious, but I guess just noticing, how am I communicating this? Can I do it in a slightly different way? And that was helpful. So I think for practicing it was just so helpful. It just gave me a little bit more confidence when it came to trying to answer questions on the spot. Do kind of research on the particular interview that you've got. So I only had that one interview, but I really did try to read up on kind of what the course that I was applying to was like, what they might be looking for, what their kind of philosophy is, or if they align themselves to any particular models, etc. And I guess that helped, that I could kind of really try and get a sense of what they might be looking for, and or at least how I might be able to use how I might be able to kind of relate to the course in that way. There are people that that have been part of that course, or have ever had an interview. Kind of, I think for me, there was one person I knew that had gone to the same course I was applying to, and so it was really helpful to just kind of check in with them to get some advice about what they were looking for. It was here at UCL, and they were looking. My sense of my impression was that they were looking for kind of being able to be thinking on the spot, I think was the idea. And so in some ways it was a kind of a case of not worrying too much about loads and loads of different theories, kind of getting the basics and being able to apply them in a kind of quite creative or quite sort of thoughtful in the moment way. And so that was just helpful. Getting a bit of encouragement, I guess, as well as anything from anyone you know that's been through that. Recognition can create a huge pressure, and knowing that actually I've done all that I can on the day. This is on the day of the interview, because I think obviously before that there's still preparation, there's still reading, and there's practice that I think for me was helpful. But I guess on that day, having kind of really tried to find a way of managing any anxieties, any nerves and things like that as much as I could, it was a case of, well, I've done all I can here, and I've done well to get to this point, and this is an interview. I'm just going to try as much as I can to just sort of enjoy it, actually. And that's not always so easy at times, perhaps, but there were times where I kind of was able to just be a little bit more natural, a bit more kind of comfortable, as much as I guess I could be in that situation. But that was really important to not put too much pressure on myself, but just to sort of highlight that I've done what I can, and now it's a case of just being myself, and the hard work that I've done for however many years it's been, plus the time that I spent preparing for today, is all that matters, really. And that I think was helpful. Firstly, about the sort of confidence in being able to kind of get to that place of being a clinical psychologist. So it was interesting, the idea of being, working in clinical psychology, but actually there's something about, for me, at different times of that journey, or this journey that I'm on, that I would sort of wonder, am I going to get there? Am I going to be able to do this? Is this possible? And I suppose that obstacle is something that I thought through, and actually, I recognise I'm going to try and go for it, and I'm going to enjoy this. But I guess actually that for me is one of the obstacles, has been one of the obstacles, is thinking, am I good enough? Am I academically able to achieve this, or able to undertake this, maybe? And perhaps actually at times in my journey, there's been a thought of kind of what is required. Right? They talk about kind of, I think that they're always quite clear nationally, but particularly for the different courses, what they're looking for as a minimum requirement academically. And so I recognise that that's a big part of it. It's competitive, and it's academically it's a high level training. So I was aware that I needed to, for me, it was a case of I felt like I needed to bolster my kind of academic credentials, I guess. And so I decided to do a master's straight after my undergrad, and I think that maybe I can say that's a bit of an obstacle. There was a bit of an obstacle, kind of thinking what may be a limitation, what might I need to do to sort of get to a place where I'm eligible and I'm able to undertake this. And linked to that, actually, an obstacle was kind of thinking, well, then a master's is kind of that costs money, and that's not maybe exactly what I envisaged when I started getting into, went to the university undergrad. You think you're spending money, you worked for a long time, so you studied for a long time. There's maybe an expectation to start getting paid, getting a job, and doing masters is different. I guess for me to manage that obstacle, and there was one thing was, I think it's still around, the career development loan. There was kind of, they paid for the tuition and they gave you a bit of maintenance, and you didn't pay anything until you got your job. I think it was after the course, and you pay back in kind of help, good, I think government sort of subsidised or something, but sort of instalments. And that was one way of kind of managing that obstacle. How can I both bolster my academic qualifications, as well as to that for me was going to help me to get onto the training. And secondly, how am I going to manage the kind of the fact that these things cost money, and I need to sort of find a way of managing that. So that helped. I did it part-time. I worked part-time alongside that to get a bit of money, and so for me that they are obstacles, because it means that the journey is a bit longer, I guess, doing it part-time, I guess having to work a bit to pay back the loan, or however, all those sorts of things. I think they are obstacles, and they're fairly significant, I guess, particularly when you're looking for jobs and you're thinking some of the roles that you initially start looking for are kind of there's an expectation possibly to do honorary sort of voluntary roles, and that's not always possible when you're trying to manage things financially as well, and also kind of having those conversations with family and partners, or whatever, whoever it is, that trying to find a way. For me, there was a sense of I need to find a way of kind of making this sustainable and feasible to be able to deal with these things. So having had that support, I think that helped a lot. I had the support of my wife, my now wife, and my family, I guess, to be able to say, we understand this and we get what you're trying to do, and I suppose there's maybe a bit of that, I think, that's helpful, that people know what you're trying to do. Psychology seems to be one of those things that perhaps is quite misunderstood, or there's a lack of awareness of exactly what it is, but also kind of who they are, who psychologists are, how they become psychologists, what they've done to get there, etc. And I guess that's maybe a bit of an obstacle as well. It's an initial obstacle, trying to apply for a job, where your first job, where you need a bit of experience, and obviously it's your first job, so there's that difficulty. And I guess it's then thinking creatively, maybe I can volunteer. What if I volunteered at a youth club or that kind of thing? That didn't take up a lot of time, but it was something that enabled me to say, I'm going to try and think about how actually I've done something here that is sort of relevant if you think about it in that way. And that maybe helped to kind of start that process of getting a relevant job, or relevant paid job in the social care and mental health world. So that was another obstacle, I think, that's understandably difficult, but can be managed, can be overcome. What it could be for me in that instance. I've enjoyed it. It's been a good experience. I think I've definitely been pushed, and there's times where it's tough, and it's kind of it's a challenge to meet the deadlines, or to kind of get work done and try and manage working in a placement, and sort of trying to get on with things academically, with assignments, etc. But that's quite rewarding as well, I guess. You're putting yourself through something, slightly pushing yourself, well, definitely pushing yourself, and I think that learning is, for me, seems like quite a lot of learning, quite a lot of accelerated learning, and there's something really great about learning about things and then applying it, being able to work in a placement, being placed in a service where you can kind of use some of that stuff, not always all of it straight away, but it's all helpful knowledge and kind of ideas about learning skills that straight away there's opportunities to try to practice. So I think it's definitely great training, and to be able to be afforded that opportunity to be kind of invested in that way, to be given space to be supervised, and to have kind of learning requirements, and having kind of everything's geared, quite often feels like it's geared towards developing me as a psychologist. And that's really, when I sort of reflect back on that, it's that's great, that's what I'm able to do in this training. And so that is what makes it so enjoyable. But it is tough. I think that's the other side of it is, there were times where you just think, how am I going to get all this done? Or I'm not going to be able to kind of do these things that I wanted to do socially, or that kind of thing. For me, it's a case of trying to get a balance in my life. I suppose like most people, it's trying to balance things, trying to juggle things, and get the right balance of work and play, or kind of time spent with family versus time spent with friends, versus time spent kind of trying to get assignments done or getting work done. So yeah, it's definitely tough. I think the training as well is you're meeting lots of really interesting people. It's great, great to have that have that opportunity to work in lots of different settings. I guess we kind of do that a little bit often in sort of aspiring to get onto the course. Well, for me, that's what it was. It was kind of trying to get a bit of different experiences. But this is, working in this particular way with supervision of a psychologist and in various settings, I think is really important. And you don't, I think, again, it's a real benefit to the training to be in different roles or different places working in this way, and also even colleagues, getting to know the lay of the land of sort of different NHS and other associated services, and understanding kind of, at the moment maybe not so much, but like there's been introductions to kind of the political sort of side of the NHS and healthcare, health and social care, and thinking about the different roles, the different disciplines, and different professions, and there's just definitely a lot of learning and actually meeting with those people, not just learning kind of about it, but actually experiencing it. So what do kind of these particular link workers do? What do these social workers or nurses or psychiatrists, or really you're afforded opportunities to really work closely with other people, and obviously the other trainees, and being part of a large cohort here there's so many really interesting characters, so many people that are so thoughtful, and I guess it just definitely feels like a journey of kind of discovering more about yourself, discovering more about kind of the world of psychology in really interesting ways, in groups, reflective groups, and really kind of questioning things, I guess, being critical of things. So I think for me, training's been great to just be more open-minded, to think about things in a critical and a careful, thoughtful way. It's another hard question, actually, because I think it reminds me of the question of why I chose to do clinical psychology, in that I'm still sort of working it out, I guess. So I think the question's hard for me to answer in that sense, but it's also a really interesting question, because I suppose I was thinking about this, and actually being a guy is one thing, which isn't exactly related to the question, but I suppose it's the minority bit, in terms of noticing that. And I think that might remind me of, actually, there's something about the visible sort of differences, being on the course with the cohort of different people, and so you're aware of that. I think being part of a large cohort at UCL, there is something about this. When you're in the class or lecture, there's times where I sort of look around or I notice, there's lots of different people, all from different backgrounds, and minority backgrounds too, and maybe also benefiting from having international students. So there's quite a few different people from different backgrounds there, and it's actually, I think, when it's smaller groups, so like a smaller reflective group, or a smaller sort of group that's just kind of we might be chatting together, and it's then that you might recognise or realise, based on a conversation or just based on whatever it might be, that there's a difference there, maybe that comes up. And sometimes it's in these kind of smaller groups where the conversation is to do with difference and similarities, and it's an interesting one for me, because I guess there is something about being sort of Asian, South Asian, and knowing that that's a minority, I'm part of that minority. But equally, I guess there's something about not always kind of identifying in that particular way, particularly if there are other people that maybe identify with that part of themselves in a different way, that they might identify more strongly, or they might, for them being that, from being an ethnic minority in that sense, is very different to them, means different things to them. And so for me, then I might even notice differences between myself and others from that same sort of group. Similarly, I might sort of notice similarities between myself and people from other groups. And I think that it's just kind of, again, continually be making me question who I identify as. And obviously there's different aspects to that, and when do they get triggered in different moments, and when are they relevant or irrelevant, or when do I know that they're relevant? Because quite often I won't think about that difference. So for me, kind of being an ethnic minority, or being in a minority group in that sense, is maybe at times can make me more self-conscious, perhaps, in different settings. That I recognise in this conversation we're talking about something where if we all are coming from a particular perspective, and I could group those perspectives, I'm the only one in this group coming from this particular perspective of being an Asian guy, or being whatever it might be, a person of colour, or however I might be able to describe it in that moment, in that situation. So I suppose it's just one of those things that comes up, and that can come up in this kind of classroom, in the group, in the training, but it can also come up in the experiences of clinical experiences. And I do think that people, any person can experience those kind of things. Obviously, it's not exclusively for ethnic minorities to have these kind of thoughts and experiences. But I guess there's something about the visibility of it that sometimes can make me more aware of that difference, and perhaps also and I know this is not always the case in all services, but in services where the demographic, the people that I'm working with, will be a typical majority, sort of white British, for example. There are times I've had a couple of times where this is the idea of being either male, but actually also being kind of Indian Asian, has been something that needed to be thought about, in the sense that there's been a couple of times where it's come up in a session, maybe, about the visible difference in the room with the person. That doesn't have to necessarily just be because I'm an ethnic minority. It could happen to someone that might be in the majority as a white British person. But I guess there's probably a little bit more of that, possibly, given the if it's about difference, then working with more of the majority ethnicity might bring up that difference a little bit more. I think I'm still trying to kind of think that through, about how it affects me being an ethnic minority, also even just being a male, in psychology and in working in mental health. So I think for me it's something that is interesting, as well as kind of at times a bit challenging, a bit difficult. There's an interest for me in terms of trying to understand how people identify, and of course how I identify myself. I think for me, as I grew up, I think I became less curious, less interested, or I was less questioning of things. I think when I was younger, I was always very curious as a child, and interested in why things were the way they were. And I was still at 16, but I think there were times where I think it would be great to have, to be able to tell myself back then, don't lose that kind of interest in why things are the way they are, questioning why they are the way they are, because I think I believe I can be quite impressionable. I think I was quite impressionable, and that's think questioning things is a good thing, and it's maybe 16 is a little bit later, but I think it's just helpful to. It would be helpful, I think, to be reminded or be told by myself. Stay curious, stay interested in things, be open and question things, and then I think that would serve me really well in, I guess, like navigating all the different options or the different choices, and not kind of getting swept away with things so easily. The other thing I think would be about kind of being firm, standing firm, like being confident, perhaps, that I kind of felt like I knew what I wanted to do. It was very broad. I never knew exactly what job I wanted to do, but I kind of knew what I was interested in. And I knew that I wanted to do stuff that I was interested in. Wanted to work with people. That was always something I wanted to do. But I do think there have been lots of times early on and right up until very recently, I guess, where the other thoughts come up in my mind, and I might think, oh, what about doing this? And maybe a bit indecisive, I guess, naturally, and I can be unsure. And I think that's okay sometimes. I don't think it's necessarily a really bad thing, but I think that for me, I would want to be able to tell myself to sort of think about who I am, what's important to me, what I want to get from a particular role or particular experience, particular thing in my life, and so kind of being able to stick to that and not feel like I have to conform to some other idea that is put on me, or that I feel is put on me by the people. I think we're linked to that, staying firm and being confident in myself is kind of trying to ask myself questions. So it's maybe links the two, being curious and being confident, but sort of being interested in myself and questioning why I'm interested in certain things or why I want to do certain things. And like values, I'm interested in values. I'm interested in what motivates, and I guess I'm kind of interested in it, but I'm not always very good at thinking about it for myself. And I think that would be something that it's never too late to do. But at 16, I think would have been a great thing to be able to do a little bit more of reflecting, self-reflection, I guess, thinking about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, being critical about those things. One other thing, actually, I think I'd want to hear, or I think it would be good to hear as a 16-year-old, is about relationships. I think there's I said I'm interested, and I am interested in people. I'm interested in working with people and being with people. But I guess actually having those key people in my life, and I'd want to tell myself to kind of invest in that and sort of don't take those things for granted. Those people around me that are important, that that you feel at ease with, the people that kind of you can enjoy good times with, and that can kind of challenge you, and all of those things. I think I knew that more or less, but just really sort of emphasising that, I think would help, and possibly also thinking about how it's important to have those key people. A lot of changes, I guess, soon after that 16 years, being 16 years old. You might move school, you might move uni, you might move areas, you're going all over the place. And I guess just trying to maintain those key people in your life, those relationships with those key people, and because they're so important, I guess, throughout the rest of your life. So that's just an extra thing I just thought of that I definitely want to additionally tell myself at 16. Definitely just try to enjoy the journey. And I know, again, it's a bit of a cliche, I think, but it's definitely something I think I'd want to hear myself. I think that it can so easily become this really really tough journey, really tough experience of constantly thinking, how am I going to get onto this course? How am I going to make these ends meet? How am I going to manage this situation? And at times throughout sort of the pathway I've taken so far, it has been that way, that I've sort of thought, what am I doing? How is this relevant to what I want to be doing? Right? Always kind of focused. Maybe it's a case of being obsessed with the goal rather than kind of being having it in mind, aspiring to that, but losing sight of like what actually I'm doing right now and how I can enjoy that. So it is a bit of that cliche of kind of enjoying the journey, enjoying the ride in that sense. But I think when you enjoy what you're doing, even if you are sort of thinking about the future a lot, I think at the very least just being able to really maximise what you're getting out of what you're doing right now. Because for me, I've had times throughout that journey where I thought maybe clinical psychology isn't for me. Maybe and does that matter if it isn't? And sometimes you think, well, I've done all these things I've been doing to get on the clinical training, and I think that was where I sort of thought to myself, does that matter? I mean, these things in and of themselves are useful experiences, important things that I'm doing, and actually just kind of being able to really enjoy the moment, enjoy that kind of being in that role or working in that particular way. So that would be a key thing, to just enjoy that. And I think linked with that is this idea that clinical psychology is one way of applying psychology. It's one way of working in mental health. It's one way of kind of developing my understanding of myself and of what motivates people, what affects people, and that's really important. That's really interesting. But knowing that doesn't have to be the only goal, and that maybe I think that's what I did, and I think that's what helped me to kind of relax a bit about it. Was that there are other things that I can do. I can take that same attitude of being curious, being interested in sort of trying to make a difference and trying to understand people, and there are other things that can help to do that. So I guess I think my aspiring sort of self, then aspiring to get onto clinical psychology, and even now aspiring to become a clinical psychologist, it's good to have that kind of goal, I think. But I've known that at times I need to get that. That's got to be it. And I think what's helped me is to think, what I really want to do here is I want to use the skills that I'm learning. I want to kind of continually develop myself as a kind of person working in mental health, and that's what I'm kind of passionate about. And so I think to be driven and to be focused, but not to become too narrowly sort of set on achieving one particular thing. So I think that will be an important important thing to try to tell myself.